The room went quiet after Daniel finished talking. He had been standing in front of 12 people, smiling proudly, explaining the business he was going to build. A clothing brand, an online store, his own designs. He had even chosen the name. Everyone congratulated him. His mother hugged him. His best friend told him, "Man, you're finally going to do it." Daniel smiled. But 3 months later, the business didn't exist. The website was never built. The designs were still sitting inside a folder on his laptop, and the name he'd been so excited about had already been forgotten. The strange part was that Daniel hadn't failed. He had never really started, and he would spend the next 2 years trying to understand why. Daniel was 27 and lived in Columbus, Ohio. He worked a normal office job, answering customer emails for a company he didn't care much about. Every morning, he drove through the same traffic. Every afternoon, he watched the clock. And every night, he came home with the same thought. There has to be more than this. Daniel had always wanted to build something of his own. He loved clothing and design. He spent hours looking at fabrics, studying logos, and sketching ideas in a notebook. He wasn't lazy. That was what made his situation so confusing. He worked hard for other people. He just couldn't seem to work consistently for himself. Then one Friday night, he finally decided. He was going to start his clothing business, and this time, he told everyone. Daniel told his mother, then his best friend, Marcus, then 2 co-workers, then his cousin, then, eventually, almost anyone who asked what he was working on. He talked about the logo. He talked about the website. He talked about how he wanted the first collection to look. He even created an Instagram page before he had a single product. People began asking him questions. When are you launching? How much will the shirts cost? Can I get one when they're ready? Every question made Daniel feel closer to success. But something strange was happening. The more he talked about the dream, the less he worked on it. At night, instead of designing, he watched videos about entrepreneurship. Instead of contacting manufacturers, he researched packaging. Instead of building the store, he redesigned the logo. He was preparing endlessly. But he wasn't moving. And because everyone already knew about his dream, he began feeling as if he had something to prove. 3 months passed, then 6. Marcus eventually asked him, "So when are you launching?" Daniel laughed. "Soon." But he didn't feel confident anymore. Every time someone asked about the business, he felt embarrassed. So he started avoiding the subject. Then something happened that made everything worse. Marcus called him one evening. "I actually launched mine." Daniel froze. Marcus had started a small photography business. He had told almost nobody. He had simply bought a camera, created a basic website, found his first client, and started learning. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Daniel congratulated him. Then he hung up and stared at his own laptop. His clothing designs were still unfinished. For the first time, Daniel realized something painful. He had spent 6 months talking about becoming an entrepreneur. Marcus had spent 6 months becoming one. Daniel tried to change. He deleted the social media page. He stopped telling people about the business. He made a schedule. For 2 weeks, he worked every night after work. He finished 3 designs. He contacted a supplier. He built part of the website. For the first time, things were moving. Then his old habits returned. One difficult week became 2. The schedule slipped. The supplier stopped responding. Daniel became frustrated. And instead of continuing quietly, he did what he had always done. He told people about his new plan. "I figured it out this time." But the moment he announced it, something inside him relaxed. He had already received the congratulations. He had already experienced the feeling of being someone who was going to succeed. He didn't realize it yet, but the applause was becoming a substitute for progress. One Saturday morning, Daniel visited Marcus. Marcus's apartment was filled with camera equipment, bills, contracts, unfinished projects. It wasn't glamorous. Marcus was struggling too. Daniel looked around and asked, "How did you actually start?" Marcus laughed. "I didn't know what I was doing." Daniel smiled. "No, seriously." Marcus looked at him. "I was scared that if I told everyone what I wanted to do, I'd start caring more about looking successful than actually becoming successful." Daniel became quiet. Marcus continued, "So I kept it to myself." That sentence stayed with Daniel. On the drive home, he thought about every dream he'd ever announced, every conversation, every compliment, every time someone had told him he was going to do something great, and he finally understood. Sometimes talking about a dream gives your brain a small taste of the reward before you've earned it. You feel seen. You feel accomplished. You feel like the person you're trying to become. And that feeling can quietly remove the urgency to do the work. Daniel went home that night and opened his laptop. He didn't post anything. He didn't tell Marcus. He didn't tell his mother. He simply worked, one design, then another. The next night, he worked again. Some nights he was exhausted. Some designs were terrible. One supplier rejected him. Another raised the minimum order. His first website looked awful, but nobody knew. And somehow, that made it easier. There was no audience waiting for him to succeed. No one waiting to ask when he would launch. No one expecting an announcement. There was only the work. Months passed. Daniel improved. He eventually found a supplier. He redesigned the website. He ordered a small batch of shirts. Then, one Tuesday evening, he opened the first box. Inside were his designs. Real shirts. Something that had existed only in his imagination for almost 2 years was finally sitting on his kitchen table. Daniel didn't announce it. He simply took a picture and uploaded the products. His first order came 3 days later, then another. It wasn't a huge success. He didn't become rich. But he had finally done something far more important. He had stopped talking about the person he wanted to become and started becoming him. Daniel eventually realized that dreams don't always need an audience. Some dreams need protection, not because you should be ashamed of them, but because fragile things need time to grow before they are exposed to the opinions, expectations, and applause of everyone around you. There is nothing wrong with sharing your goals. The problem begins when talking becomes a replacement for doing. When announcing the plan feels better than making progress. When people's excitement gives you the emotional reward you were supposed to earn through the work. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say about your dream is nothing. Just work. Let the results speak later. A year after Daniel launched his clothing brand, Marcus visited his apartment again. This time, there were boxes stacked against the wall, orders waiting to be shipped, a few sketches on the table, and a small whiteboard covered in unfinished ideas. Marcus looked around and smiled. "You actually did it!" Daniel looked at him. "No." Marcus raised an eyebrow. Daniel smiled. "I started." And that was the difference, because the dream had never needed more words. It had needed fewer announcements and more ordinary nights when nobody was watching. So, if there is something you've been dreaming about, be careful how often you explain it. You don't need everyone to know what you're building. You don't need applause before you've done the work. And you certainly don't need to prove your dream to anyone. Sometimes the best way to protect a dream is to keep it quiet, long enough to become real. Don't announce the life you're going to build. Build it. Daniel eventually learned that having a dream wasn't enough. He needed a system that would help him show up, even on the days when motivation disappeared. And that's exactly why I created the 30-Day Discipline Workbook, a digital workbook designed to help you turn intention into daily action. For 30 days, you can use it to stay focused, track your progress, reflect on your actions, and build the discipline needed to keep moving toward your goals. If you want to take a look at the workbook or get your own copy, I've placed the link in the description, and I've also pinned it in the comments section. Don't just dream about the person you want to become. Start building that person, one disciplined day at a time. And for Daniel, that was exactly what happened. He stopped waiting to feel motivated. He stopped looking for people to tell him he was on the right path. He simply decided that from that point forward, his actions would speak before his words. And slowly, the dream that had once disappeared behind so many announcements began to become real. Because sometimes the dream doesn't need a bigger audience. It needs a quieter commitment. A commitment you keep when nobody is watching. And Daniel finally understood something he wished he had learned 2 years earlier. You don't have to tell the world what you're building. You just have to build it.